This episode of Head Game was recorded on Gadigal land.
It's October 21st, 2012. Heston Russell leads his team through combat operations in Afghanistan. It's his third deployment with the Special Forces, but his first as the commander of the November platoon. He has more than 50 successful missions under his belt. Despite precise planning and carefully sequenced manoeuvres, one of the soldiers under Heston's command dies during an operation.
Shit! Go, go, go!
24-year-old Corporal Smith is killed instantly when an IED explodes during a mission to target insurgents in Afghanistan's Uruzgan province. For Heston, Corporal Smith is the first and would be the only soldier lost under his command. But it's a scar that would remain well into the future. I'm Middleton, and this is Head Game. Today, 5th generation Defence Forces veteran Heston Russell on his 16 years in the Australian Army and the battle that's followed him from the front line. Now, Heston, I'm going to rattle through quickly.
Oh, dear.
Heston, you spent 16 years in the military, joining at the age of 17, going on to complete more than 100 combat missions. Your dad served 20 years in the army. Your grandfather, your mum's dad, fought in Korea and Vietnam wars. Your great-grandfather also served during World War II. And his great-great-grandfather fought on the Western Front during World War I, being gassed twice during the previous 2 years of combat in France. You deployed 4 times to Afghanistan and the Middle East, served in Iraq as the Special Operations Joint Lead Planner within the Special Operations Joint Task Force. You've done multiple counter-terrorist operations within Australia and the Asia-Pacific region. A year-long exchange within the United States Special Operations Command. Wow, I thought that I had a versatile career in the military. You, my man, absolutely blow me out the water. It seems like that you were engulfed as a youngster with this sort of military family, this military environment, military aura. What was it like growing up, and when did you realise that you were encapsulated by military heroes that, you know, that was bred into your family?
Oh, Ant, first and foremost, thanks for having me on. Well done on rattling all that off. You're one of the few people who would probably know most of those acronyms and all the rest. I grew up with the military influence from my dad and living within that military family, moving around the country. But as far as my grandfather, I knew my grandfather, mum's dad, as a fisherman. I didn't know about his service in Korea or in Vietnam.
Gotcha.
He was a gentleman. He was a ballroom dancing champion, something you know a lot about as well.
We won't mention that, mate.
No.
We won't mention my Dancing with the Stars day. We're meant to go into this military mindset now.
Gotcha. And I didn't honestly truly appreciate my lineage until actually more recent years when I started doing some research myself. My passage into the military came simply from seeing my father and his mates and those around him as those sort of aspirational men that were, sure, masculine and all the traits we see from men in society, but were also caring, nurturing team players, had that heart of service, putting others and the mission before themselves. And I really saw them as very aspirational values and character traits to me, especially during a time when I went through high school. I was the fat kid at high school. I was unpopular. I was probably having doubts.
As he sat there with veins rippling through his muscles.
Never again, Ed. Never again. I'm never going back, mate. But, you know, it's a classic identity piece. And I saw the potential self-actualized best version of myself in the military and wanted to at least go through that journey to see where it would take me.
Yeah, you say, and I think it's a massively important point where you say, you know, people think that in the military we're just, you know, individuals locked away in an armory and the armory's open and away we go, we cause destruction everywhere we go. But the compassionate, the empathetic, the loving side of who we are, to not only want to serve our friends and our country and ourselves, but to serve the people.
Yeah.
You know, we are there because we care about the people. We want what's best for the people. We want to be able to give them their their blanket of safety or freedom, that they sleep under whilst we go and prevent terror from coming onto our shores. And there's that huge sort of compassionate side to a soldier that is just sort of, wiped out, that people, don't even mention, which you just mentioned, which is huge because, again, with myself, that was a huge part of, going into combat. It's like you're there to preserve life. And I believe that no one has the God-given right to take life. However, if you or someone else thinks they have the right to take a life, I will simply deny you that right by taking your life, therefore saving a life.
Yep.
So I always processed it in that way of preserve life, preserve life, preserve life. And when I went into combat like that, it gave me a new sense of soldiering. And the one that you just tapped on there, which I think is super important, is the compassionate, the loving, that empathetic side that no one ever sees. And it's interesting that you mentioned that you were brought up around this environment, because anyone would think from your background, me having reeled off everything that, got you up in the morning doing press ups, which would probably happen, but, having that sort of male sort of dominant organization or family unit where it's just hoorah, let's get the job done, where ultimately it's a flip, right?
Yeah, massive. I mean, as you know, mate, being a soldier, being an officer, so much of it is actually diplomacy. Even out in Afghanistan, we were fighting the enemy in and amongst the locals and the villages. We went out with our partner force. So much of it was also the information operations piece. You had to deter the insurgents from wanting to ever fight you or our allies again, but you're trying to win over the locals to support you, because when we got on the ground on targets, it was the locals telling us, hey, he's not supposed to be here, he's not supposed to be here. And these are massive parts of the narrative that are missed in the movies, are missed in the news, are missed in how much our soldiers, sailors, airmen and women were some of the most incredible diplomats, as well as having to flip the switch to be warriors to take and prevent the loss of life in order to save life and achieve the mission. Yeah.
Was there a moment growing up where you just thought, or you saw something, you might have seen some medals or whatever it may be, where you thought, this is what I want to do, I want to join the military? Or was it just the norm in your household and that was the normal route of progression to take to join the military? How did that come about?
Well, I think probably like a lot of veterans, mate, I had a lead scout. I had the son of one of my dad's army buddies. He was about 4 or 5 years older than me, and he ended up going to the Australian Defence Force Academy. He got direct posted to the commandos, and I think at the age of 15, I remember walking into the recruiting office and said, I want to be a commando officer.
I want to be like him.
The sergeant laughed at me and said, there's a few steps you got to take in between. But that was always the goal.
Straight to the top, mate. Listen, I love it.
Means to an end, everything else in between. Yeah, that was the goal. That was what got me in.
And just talk me through, and so there's obviously the basic training you have to go through. What unit did you join? How did basic training look? And was it a shock to you, or was it what you expected?
I joined straight out of school. I was 17, having gone to school in Queensland. And I went down to the Defence Force Academy in Canberra, which is, you do 3 years there, you study, you do a degree at the same time. Picture a uni where you'd have your blocks of study throughout the day, but in the morning it's physical training, or it's out there in the freezing temperatures doing an hour and a half a drill. Every Friday is a white glove room inspection where you sleep on your floor because you've ironed your sheets to such a crisp point that you don't want to sleep on them that night.
With the hospital corners and
3 years.
Oh, mate,
3 years repeat.
Not good goosebumps. You're bringing back the shivers.
Still to this day, I feel rebellious if I don't make my bed. But and you're wearing the military uniform, polyesters every single day. And then when normal universities would go on holidays, you're out bush doing your basic training, doing your sleeping under hoochies and digging pits and patrolling, the stuff that handheld drones do these days, we had to do back then. So it was 3 years, and you go across the hill to the Royal Military College, where there's no more civilian academics. It's all military strategy and study, and I absolutely love that. And then came out promoted.
That's where it starts to get meaty, right? That's when the two worlds, I suppose, start to separate really, from society to really engulfing yourself fully.
It's really well put, absolutely.
Into the military.
And particularly for me, wanting to be an officer, that's where you really got to delve into the military art of tactics. Yeah. There's all the science of, the fundamentals of the attack, the principles of war, all the rest. But then we would just go out constantly and drill and plan, and then have to get a team and do our plans and fail Elle and see what it was like if ever you were going to make soldiers do that. It was brilliant. And as opposed to arguing over, philosophy or Pythagoras' theorem or all the rest, it was about military strategy. And as you know, mate, it's one of the oldest professions in the world, and the ability to draw all that information and knowledge together to then develop your own tactics and strategy is really fun. There's actually quite a creative, artistic side to it, which you then have to go practice physically to test your creativity. It's not just a blank canvas. So
you have to put it into practice, into action to test the theory ultimately, right?
Absolutely. And that's the fun stuff. And, all of that combined with the officer training I did throughout my career, and particularly the Special Forces, that development of the art of tactics is something that I just loved so much from the military career and never really got to appreciate that creative piece. But promoted to lieutenant, went up to Townsville to the 2nd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, a line infantry battalion, where I completed 3 years. Within my first year, I was deployed to Timor-Leste, peacekeeping operation. And to this day, I'd probably say it was one of the most important milestones in my career as a 21-year-old platoon commander of 30 people. A 7-month deployment where you're spending most of the time with your weapons slung and going out into the local tribes, into local villages, doing key leadership engagements.
Hearts and minds.
That's it. And I'd studied Indonesian, the language, as a major at the academy, and straight away I was able to really engage with the locals in one of their languages and really achieve a lot as the commander. You can imagine that comes through just from a respectful level in itself.
21 years old as a platoon commander.
Yeah.
How did you feel, especially going into that position as a 21-year-old, such a young officer going into such an important role? And then you've got the NCOs as well that are there that have been in for like 15, 16, 17 years. And they see this young, young spunker come in. He's 21 years old. And you have to command respect. You have to, you almost have to, go in with a level of, authority, especially as a 21-year-old. How did that unfold, and how hard was that to settle in as, let's call it, one of the lads?
Yeah, no, great question, mate, and you get it. Yeah. You are old bull, new bull, and all the rest. By this stage, I was really well advised by my dad. My dad had been in the military during peacetime. He joined as a soldier, then became an officer. And during his 20 years, he deployed to Rifle Company Butterworth, and that was it. There was nothing else on. And he got out and he got back in 10 years later, never to be promoted again. And his simple words would be good at your job and be a good person and understand what your job is and what your role is. And for me, coming into any team, and this really applied later when particularly I went into the Special Forces, you can imagine I was 26 when I did that, and I had guys who deployed to Afghanistan 9 or 10 times. My job was to be an expert in planning and leadership, and understanding that leadership is about actually being an impact player, knowing and understanding your people. Uniting people with purpose is the role of a leader, not being the guy out the front constantly. And
delegation, decision making.
And group planning and group decision making, like bringing in your platoon sergeant, bringing in your section commanders, harnessing that amazing experience and corporate knowledge, giving them buy-in to the plan, learning from them, but then just knowing at the end of the day, you're the one to make the decision and you're the one responsible whether it's a good plan or a bad plan. If it's a good plan, it's all their success. If it's a bad plan, it's all your failure.
Exactly. Guess where I'm going to.
Yeah. And just honestly, just making yourself equal and having those conversations where at the end of the day, you do have the responsibility of the authority of your rank, but no one is entitled to anything based on their authority. I mean, as you would know, mate, it's the toxic leaders and the weak leaders who default to authority. Leadership is about inspiring people. And I was very well benefited by my physicality. I was always excellent at physical tasks and tactical tasks and patrolling and all the rest. And then really put in my due diligence to the planning, the communications, the orders and all the rest. And just over time, through respect and meritocracy, the guys sort of were won over and you become part of the accepted tribe. But then, as you know, the next part is to make sure you don't transition into fully being one of the lads and maintaining that professional buffer, especially as a 21-year-old.
That chain of command, that hierarchical structure. There's a line to be drawn, and for obvious reasons. And I love what you said about leadership is about putting yourself as an equal.
Yeah,
it's that's super important.
Well, it's a service. At the end of the day, leadership is a service to others, and you would know this from the military, mate. I've seen so many of my colleagues who've gone up the ranks. There's this something happens when they flip and they think leadership is about being served.
Yeah.
And that's when you've lost it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's a great point, and hence why you probably absolutely flourished in what you'd done as a 21-year-old, and then you progress onto the special forces. Now, what's that transition like? And because like myself, I went on selection when I was 26 as well.
Boom.
And you
Good
can,
age, powerful age.
I joined when I was 17 as
Boom,
well.
powerful, mate.
I was a grunt, but it's one of those where your aspirations can almost be treated as a delusion, when you're so young.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, no, he's so young and keen, and did you ever face any backlash, shall we say, or any sort of jealousy or envy, being where you were, who you were, what you'd already achieved at such a young age, and then wanting, not going on, but wanting to be a special forces operator?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly that delusion's probably a handy thing to keep you solely focused. Remember, I had a plan A and there was no plan B. The biggest struggle I had, you had to serve a minimum of 4 years in the military before being able to apply.
Yeah.
And then when I applied, I remember turning up for the assessment day before the selection course. It was one of 30 officers and I was the youngest officer, and all the others had deployed to the Middle East before. One of them was my adjutant from when I was at the Royal Military College. Imposter syndrome was the biggest thing I had to deal with, because I just sat there and compared myself to them. I knew, and I'd studied all the tabulated data of every asset and everything we'd need in our planning iterations for, a Middle East-based scenarios we'd face on the course. But these people had called in gunshots. They'd commanded troops in combat. And the hardest part for me was to get over that mindset of, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced, and I'm not as good as these others before we're even up against any form of assessment. And as you know, mate, you're not being assessed against them, you're being assessed against yourself and in your own performance.
Yeah.
And it was those initial mental and mindset gateways that I had to really push through in a very rapid rate.
And how does it look, Special Forces selection? How long is it? And obviously I know you can't go too much into detail about it, but how does it look, going on from as an officer, or as anyone really going on to Special Forces selection? Is it like the UK where you're literally separating yourself from the unit? You sign yourself over. If you fail, then you get RTU'd, returned to the unit. If you pass, and you progress on into a squadron, which was what the Special Forces does in the UK.
Yeah.
You go to a Sabre squadron, and then you embed yourself there. How does it look for the Aussies?
Yeah, nice. Well, when I went through it, I have the benefit of my last job in my career was then redesigning and running the selection course just as we were coming out of Afghanistan. And I could talk to you all day about that, because I know you get that backcasting, emotional quotient development testing, all the rest. But when I did it, it was a 6-week process for an officer. There was an initial officer pre-week where the 30 of us got together, and every NCO and officer from the unit would come and just destroy you. And to this day,
yes,
mate,
I've been on one of those. I've been on one of those.
You get to see everyone who's got a chip on their shoulder come out and just go through a group therapy session at your expense.
Especially for officers.
Oh, mate. Those PT sessions, picture, 2 or 3 to 1 staff members just on you. And I have this terrible ability, I'm doing it now, where when I'm under stress or duress, I just smile. Because deep down, I'm happy to be there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And, mate, going back to...
mate.
Yes.
Never highlight yourself in a positive or negative way.
My guys used to say in combat, they wanted me to camouflage my teeth because it was the only part that the enemy might be able to see even at night. But
Brilliant.
But yeah, so and particularly being the youngest, and you going back to what you said beforehand, was that a weakness that was exploited or a perceived weakness? Oh, mate, I remember crawling through the mud, pushing tyres, flipping tyres, carrying heavy things, and next thing is like, what are you, 26 years old, candidate 12? Do you really think you have what it takes to command soldiers who've been there, killed people, done this, done that, and just planting that seeds of sabotage within your own head?
Seeds of doubt, and self-doubt that you grow in your head,
Massive. Well, mate, and I'm sure, I'd be interested to hear if the statistics are the same for you guys, but on that 6 weeks for me, I started at 91 kilos, about the weight I am now, and went down to just over 75 kilos. And of the 120 we started with, 30 finished. And 80 to 85% of the people who come off the course year after year come off by their own request. They would pull out their form and they withdraw at their own request.
Voluntary withdrawal, VW.
That's
VW,
it. Yeah, we call it WOR.
Okay, we call it VW.
And as you know, mate, that's the most important, particularly when we're given missions that are potentially no-fail. There is no backup. And that process of breaking people down physically and mentally to expose their true authenticity. And do you have what it takes when you're alone, when you're tired, when you're hungry, when you're under stress, to not come up with a reason in your head why you can't do it, but instead find a reason why you must do it. And it was brilliant to be taken on that mental journey. And then, like I said, at the end of my career, be a part of taking people on that mental journey and giving them their reflections once you come off the course. That in itself is just a evolutionary upgrade for anyone, I believe, who's gone through that process, particularly people like you and I who've gone through successfully.
So when you do finally, we call it getting badged, when you do finally pass selection, what does that feel like for you as a young officer? And what does it look like for you moving forward? Because that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? You go there and all of a sudden you are thrust off into multiple operations, multiple countries. It's like, but that moment, just that moment of you being badged or passing selection, how did that feel, and what unit did you go to, and what happened thereafter?
Yeah, so I went to the 2nd Commando Regiment, so it's the
green,
the Sherwood green beret. And as you know, mate, that beret is so coveted. It goes back to World War II, and there's so much history and honour that comes with that. And the official beret presenting ceremony is very ceremonial and very detailed for that reason. But as you said, it's just the start of the journey, and you would know better than others. There's the whole being qualified, all the qualifications and skills we got on all the courses is like the academics in university, but then there's the lived experience and application of those skills in real life that is the true education component. So while you're skilled and drilled on paper to the requirements to being a beret qualified commando, the journey just begins. Yeah. And for me, it was a baptism of fire where I was assigned to November Platoon, a platoon within Alpha Company at 2 Commando Regiment. They had just got back from Afghanistan. Right. I was the youngest going in as a platoon commander. Here's the kicker, mate. During that deployment in 2010, on insertion to a target, one of the Black Hawks carrying an element of November Platoon crashed, hit low, hit a feature up from the ground, and 3 people were killed straight away: Ben, Chuck, Tim Applin and Scotty Palmer. And the others on that helicopter sustained pretty incredible injuries, as you could imagine. They come back, they go through their decompression period. Next thing, I'm brought in as the new platoon commander. The platoon sergeant needed to be replaced. He was injured on that flight as well. So my first job is forming, norming and storming a battle-hardened platoon that's also just lost 3 of their best warriors during that recent deployment. And again, mate, it was defaulting back to the Timor piece. It's just, hey, what's my job? Get into it. And we had to then take over the domestic counter-terrorism role that we run out at Holsworthy here. And straight away we're into an exercise, that's the handover takeover exercise, that the minister has to come and sign you off, and you're shooting, moving, communicating, flying all around the country, presenting orders, doing all the rest. So I was actually really enabled by just be putting straight into a job that was 2.5 weeks.
Straight into it.
Straight in. Yep. There wasn't enough time to sit around and have cups of coffee unless it was first thing in the morning before the mission. And it was just all actions and words and orders and planning and all the rest. And straight away through just competence and being a good person at the same time, was able to win them over through the high tempo that is the nature of our operations. But it also could have very easily been the prime exposure for, as you know, mate, you can't bluff your way through that shit. And especially when the first response from the lion's den you're going into is just looking for weakness and looking for blood.
Of course they are.
That was probably one of the hardest times for me, just as far as being aware of all that. I'm very empathetic and aware of all this that's going on, and then just being able to bring your mindset down to the 5, 10 and 15 metre targets in front of you and not worry about the whole swirling emotional situation around you.
I love that, mate, and that's why, it's so important that I asked that question, because I know it. I know that one,
You're one of those people sitting up there like this, mate. Who's this effing youngster?
Who's
hey?
this frog? Who's this frog?
biceps, huh? They're not going to help you out climbing that rope, mate.
But you know what? What you said about being thrust into the into work, and having there's no time to think about things. There's no R&R. There's no It's the same with myself. I passed selection, and within 2 weeks, I was in the Middle East on pre-deployment training, and within 4 weeks, I was point man within a Sabre squadron. So I understand the importance of you being thrust into that, because you almost earn your stripes straight away, don't you, rather than having to sit back and lay back and go twiddle your thumbs in the office and go, oh shit, what am I going to do now?
That's it. And as you know, mate, that's what I just love so much about that whole Special Forces community and the whole job, particularly now in everyday life, where there is no room to hide. There's no room for inauthenticity. There's no room for this lollybag of words. It really came down to what you did and how you treated people. Mm-hmm. And as you experienced out there for real with life and death scenarios, like what other job are you able to feel out each other and form a culture where you can't hide behind a computer and emails. You're out there planning, implementing the plans, taking the fight to the enemy, receiving the fight from the enemy, and being exposed. And I think also for me, it was just amazing to see how professional that selection and training process was, to be able to then, as you said, default to your level of training. I love it. People say, in crisis, you rise to the occasion. You default to your level of training and experience. And the beast that trained us and put us out, same between Australia, the UK, the US, and all the rest, is just so professional in what it does. Yeah, and absolutely. It helps you to appreciate why you went through all of that shit to be where you're at and then be tested. Yeah,
because you question it sometimes. You go, why am I going through this? And it all makes sense when things are harder, when things are, are out of your control, where you have to adapt, you have to improvise, you have to overcome, you have to use each other. We sort of operated and functioned through the golden days, when, it's like training on the football pitch. You train because you want to perform in the cup final. We were like, right, this is what I've trained. This is what the government has spent millions on us for. This is what we need to do. Yeah. And I do call it the golden days because, Afghanistan was kinetic. You join the military, you join the Special Forces knowing that you're going to just do back-to-back tours in the Middle East. You're going to, that's where you're going to live the majority of your life. And then you're going to go on rotation. You're going to go and cross-train with the Aussies, the Americans, the Kiwis, but you knew that you'd be constantly busy. When was your first tour of Afghanistan with in the Special Forces with a body of individuals under your command?
Yeah, so 2012 was my platoon kinetic operation as a part of the Special Operations Task Group. My first deployment, I took our first female Prime Minister over there on a PSD. I was her personal security officer.
There you go.
That was fascinating. Yeah. Good to see some of the insights. But the first proper kinetic operation, we were really professional in the way in which we rotated in and out as well. I actually did a pre-deployment where I went and embedded with the company and platoon that was over there for 2 weeks and did some missions. Came back and helped run our mission rehearsal exercises, and then we deployed for 5 months in.
So you got that crossover. So
just the latest TTPs, mate. As you can imagine, everything from the technology that we were employing, from the assets in the sky through to, by that stage, we were partnering with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA guys from the US, to go into Helmand and blow up opium labs and track the money that was funding terrorism everywhere. It was great, mate. It was the golden days.
With the big silver, the pits and the silver trays where they used to do cook all the opium up.
They had these giant presses and just the different, because unfortunately being Australian, we never had any of our own aircraft or helicopters there. So just even going over there and learning who were the battle space owners, who owned the assets, who you had to take a carton of Red Bulls to if you needed an extra Apache on that target. And you and I laugh, but literally I've acquired military assets through Australian fresh cream milk and Red Bulls and Fanta for the local partner force. July 2012 deployed, based in Tarin Count, and immediately commenced 2 lines of operation. One was sort of counter leadership and insurgents within Uruzgan and Kandahar, and then the counter drugs working with the DEA guys into Helmand. And during that 5 months, 67 missions. I don't like it as a measurement, but we killed 117 insurgents, captured so many more, and I lost one of my best soldiers, Corporal Smith, who was killed by an IED on the 21st of October.
Do you remember that day? And can you recall that day?
Yeah, massively. It was so we had been sent to conduct a 3-day clearance partnered with the United States Marine Corps. They were the battlefield commander of that area of Keshmesh Khan, up near the Kajaki Fan. And they wanted to do a clearance, and we partnered with a troop of tanks. My platoon partnered with a troop of M1 Abrams tanks from the US Marine Corps, and we did a 3-day rather conventional clearance from west to east. And it was on the morning of the second day where I pushed one of my teams up into this building that was firing on our company headquarters. There's Carez systems, so giant wells cut into the ground that's got, the waterway underneath. You'd have insurgents going through those waterways, popping up with RPGs, shooting at the tanks. We're uncovering massive caches of rockets, mortars, weapons and all the rest. Yeah. And the biggest one was because we had the tanks, they just set out putting these IEDs everywhere. And I remember we'd literally start jumping on the tanks to travel even 15 metres between two compounds, and you'd just be popping as these little IEDs are going off underneath you. It was pretty incredible. On that second morning, pushed my team up to clear this compound, so a big mud bricked wall compound where insurgents were firing at our company headquarter element. They cleared that compound, but immediately found hundreds of components that would be used to make IEDs. And Scott was the special operations engineer attached to that team. I had a section attached to my platoon, and he immediately identified there were issues, and he pushed his point man back while he went and cleared this doorway, and there was a 0 metal content pressure plate that immediately detonated and killed him and blew him over about 300 metres worth of span from, a limb through to a 5-cent piece of him. And as you would know, mate, straight away, that giant plume of dust and smoke was a giant signal for every insurgent in the region to then come and try and drive their advantage. And it's still one of the most inspiring days to me, and I love reflecting on it it was terrible, but it was so tremendous in what it taught me about like that true human spirit. In Australia, we talk about the Anzac spirit, where my guys straight away, I remember looking around and the guys were up.
So where were you at this stage?
I was about 400 metres back, and then I had the call that there'd been an IED strike, and they read out his call sign was KIA, and I called over the nearest tank, grabbed my platoon headquarters, jumped on the tank and just said, drive straight for that compound. I could see the plume of dust.
Yeah, of course.
And then turned up and then just went into action mode. Like we were under attack as soon as we got there. We got the tank to drive from that compound in a straight line and punched a hole through the 3-metre high wall in the next compound. Started moving the partner force along the track that the tank had made with the track moving along. Yeah. So we knew that was IED cleared. Mm-hmm. Got absolutely pizzled moving between those two buildings, but still got them through. And then started trying to coordinate, establishing a defensive perimeter, pulled the tanks up onto points, also had other Marines with, like the Mark 19 grenade launchers, 50 cals, and then had my guys in roofs cutting holes in the walls to fire out of. And while half the platoon established that position, and we won sort of that initial initiative and took it back. Yeah. Had some Harriers come in, had some Apaches come in. Everyone wanted to help.
Show force.
Everyone wanted to come and help, but I was kind of like, hey, we can't. Everything was so close to us, and the terrain is that complicated that last thing I needed was to get in trouble legally as well. Yeah. And then I remember looking up, seeing everyone fighting, doing their job, and then watching, the other half of my platoon, big, burly, tattooed men on hands and knees, for 2.5 hours, picking up the smallest pieces of Scott to put into these bags so we could put him on the helicopter to get him out of there. And it was just so inspiring seeing that juxtaposition of, the brutality of war and warriors doing their job, and then just the care and love and affection the guys had trying to make sure we got all of Scott to send him home. And that was pretty incredible. It was my job to then carry him back to the company sergeant major, who then put him on a helicopter and took him home. And then we spent the next 2 days fighting on to finish the mission. And I'm sure you can imagine the one of my favourite pictures on my desk at home is I called in the team commanders after, went back to the company, dropped Scott off, and just got them around the map. Pulled out a knife. One of my section commanders put grenades to hold the map down just for the picture point of view, but just briefed everyone on the mission, old school, no PowerPoints, no gadgets, nothing. The situation, mission, execution, admin, logistics, command and SIG. Hey, we got a new purpose to honour Scott's death, not to take revenge, but to fight on, so he would be proud of this mission.
Yeah.
And those 3 days while we lost Scott, and it's still, painful to remember that, just forged a new level of mateship and teamwork.
Solidarity.
That I've never been able to replicate again in my life.
Unity.
Yeah. And still stands and still inspires to this day.
How hard is it not to seek revenge, or not to let that revenge mindset sort of come into play? Because, once a negative sort of emotion sets, it can lead to a negative outcome, to negative decisions, to bad decisions. And how hard is it to keep that at bay, knowing that one of your men, had just been blown up?
Great question, mate. Really great question. And particularly in that context where you don't have someone to blame. It's a bomb under the ground, so every insurgent is to blame. Mm-hmm. And being aware, I think a big thing that the selection course teaches us is to be aware of our emotions and not let them control us. And I just remember all of the emotions you spoke up came over me, came over my guys, and I think straight away it's that relationship you have going into those crisis situations where you can read those in each other and have those upfront conversations. And particularly for me, it was using that orders group to refocus that energy into the mission and not into whatever anyone was driving in their own heart, and to talk about the importance of why we're there and the long-lasting impacts of what our next actions would have. Because it's so easy. You're out there in the middle of nowhere. You are the masters of your own universe. I could call in the finger of God and give my initials to give the approvals. You could completely be unaccountable to anyone else, but it was that true test of service and those values as to why you were there that you had to display and dig into. And I honestly think it's everything that leads you up to that process, being selected, working with the team and all the rest, that really makes sure you're the right person to go through those situations. But 100%, it's a team effort. And you would know, mate, it only takes a few bad eggs or a few bad influences to help it go the other way. But fortunately, in that situation, we were able to channel that energy for the positive purpose that we still had.
What did it feel like as an officer?
Yeah.
And it's different for us, I suppose. It's the same, but, what's it like as an officer to lose one of your men on a mission that you were leading? Yeah.
I remember struggling with the emotions of shame, embarrassment, exactly as you said, like, this is my mission. I'm responsible for it at the end of the day, good or bad. And I had lost one of my soldiers, and it's not a name on a piece of paper. He had a mum, he had a sister, he has a nephew, all these sorts of things. And it's really difficult you almost feel selfish thinking about the sorrowful parts that impact you on your professional career, on all the rest. And I think it's just having to, again, what I'm good at doing in a pragmatic way, putting the mission and team before yourself. Like, it's not about me. If the shoe had been on the other foot and it was me, I know that I would have died doing what I wanted to do, and I knew that's exactly what he did as well. So I think it's really going through a very pragmatic process to understand and appreciate the emotions you're having, but to, again, remove yourself from the situation.
Personal attachment.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Yeah, especially it's a pretty hyper experience to learn it for the first time. But I was just so fascinated to feel those emotions of shame and embarrassment, and feel like I had failed in some way tactically, and perhaps break through some of that delusion, whereas to thinking that I could perfectly orchestrate warfare, like it was a written script.
Was there ever a moment for you where you thought, I suppose combat fatigued sort of kicks in, and you think, I need to hand over the torch?
Yeah, I loved it. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that self-actualized version of myself, achieving flow in combat, being so in the moment, immersed and with a team and tribe that I just felt so a part of. I would go back and do that tomorrow with the right people for the right purpose. Unfortunately, probably like yourself, I've since been able to look a lot at the wars we fought and perhaps why we were there and all the rest.
Yeah.
But for me, my reason to end up leaving the military actually came from a lot of reasons of the heart and head. I fell in love with someone and I wasn't sure how to mesh my personal life with my professional life.
Were you fell in love with someone from work? Or
No,
outside of
in America.
In America,
during that 1 year, I went to the Rangers.
Nice.
I sort of kept myself in the closet sexually throughout my entire career, and in the US, I actually got to meet professional gay men. I didn't know who were gay. I didn't
of course.
own it as their identity, and I got to figure out, hey, I can actually still be Heston Russell, the commando officer, and
100%.
whoever I want to be in my personal life. But yeah, my last deployment to Iraq, where we helped to take the fight to ISIS, one of the most incredible deployments and missions I've ever been a part of. He was back in LA, and it was the first time I've been deployed with someone back at home. And at the same time, I was deployed with the general who was going to come back and be the next commander of our special operations. He'd come from a very conventional career, and in his mindset, he needed to get us back to, haircuts, ironing uniforms, being the Special Forces Brigade, and just refused to listen to any of the experience that we had around him. And my next position, mate, was to start climbing the ranks to Lieutenant Colonel, go down to Canberra, move on to a career that was away from the guys and the teams that I wanted to be a part of. So those three combined, I took my long service leave, I followed my heart, moved to the US to be with my boyfriend at the time, and so set about forming a new life from there.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
Wow, mate, what a segue.
Bit different.
Bit different. And throughout your whole career, were you always in the closet? Where was it? Did it affect your work? Did it affect who you were? Or did you just think, were you very good at compartmentalising, separating the two?
Oh, mate, I developed this different personality, Mike, the PE teacher.
I think we need another hour for this.
I was able to compartmentalise and separate. And look, again, you can imagine, mate, how hard it is for me on the outside trying to explain military culture to the LGBTIQA plus community, and vice versa. The culture of service and mission before self to a culture that's all about being seen and being heard, and like I get it for those reasons, but I got to a place where I didn't need to be recognised or accepted for my sexuality because it meant nothing to what I truly loved. That was my mission and that was my job. And I didn't know how to mesh the two together. So I kept them completely separate. I also didn't know what gay was. I was brought up in a very conservative family up in Brisbane. When I moved down to Sydney and joined the commandos, the first insight to the gay world I saw was midriffs and drag queens on Oxford Street, and it scared the shit out of me because I didn't see there wasn't another gay Special Forces person that I knew of, and there hasn't been again in the Australian military publicly. Not that they need to be at all. So I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I was too afraid to be the first, and I was too afraid for it to potentially impact any form of stigmas or stereotypes within the guys within the unit. Like, this was 2010 to 2015, before the gay marriage vote, before all this. And as you would know, mate, it actually doesn't matter. And the guys since have reinforced it so much. But as the officer, as the commander, as a member of the Special Forces, there was nothing I wanted to introduce into the mixture of our social engagement and environment in the workplace to do that was even more uncertain than what we had to deal with. So I chose to put my sexuality on the back foot. I was more than happy with that. I never had relationships and all the rest till I met Blake. And then again, there was that natural divide where, hey, I'm done with this and it's time to explore this love thing that I've never felt before. And
mate, this is. Do you think anyone knew? Do you think anyone?
To this day,
you know what?
I delayed telling my dad a year, and he reckons he knew. But did
he? Did your dad say, "Oh no"? He didn't.
He found out a year after Mum and sister, so of course he knew. But no, and it's not that I prided myself on that. I just love, and I still love it today, where people know me as Heston Russell, not as any of these other labels in between, because that's what I feel we have to aspire from. That's where I feel we're getting it wrong in society. Like, I'm gay, you have to accept me. I'm a veteran, you have to accept me. No one ever will, mate. It's how you perform in yourself and treat others. Like, your name is your label, and that's why I fought so hard to grasp for myself and encourage others to do as well.
Well, mate, you've done a phenomenal job in doing that. Absolutely phenomenal. And sat opposite you, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. And there's so much more to say. And do you know what? I know you're gonna have to get Heston's book. Just remind us of the name of your book?
Forging the Will to Fight, and it's all on my website.
Forging the Will to Fight.
Yeah.
And it's on your website. What's your website?
HestonRussell.com.
HestonRussell.com, Forging the Will to Fight. You can go a lot more into depth by getting Heston's book. But, mate, you've been an absolute pleasure to talk to, mate. I've reminisced. I think I've talked more about myself than I have about you.
I've got to know more about you, mate. I think we know a lot about you. There's so many more layers to be seen.
Yeah, do you know, it's like everyone, right? There's so much more layers to be seen. There's so much more of us than people know. But, mate, it's an absolute pleasure to get to know you within the short hour that I've got you. What is next for you, Heston?
The book launch, mate, it's been 4 years in the making. Really looking forward to getting that out. And I'm trying to get myself back into... I run an event once a year called the Veteran Games through my charity. And it's building that. It's in its third year, veterangames.com, trying to get guys who are isolated out there and at the biggest risk of mental health together, doing obstacle courses, doing casualty evacuations, doing all the team stuff we used to do.
Love that.
And then myself getting back into some corporate speaking and just helping to spread the good word, mate, much like you do out there, and trying to just be the best version of me I can outside of that amazing purpose and environment we have with motivation in service.
That's a pretty good version, mate. It's a pretty good version of where you are right now. We can only get
mate,
better.
You're an inspiration out there in the community, and I want to thank you for your service and what you do, particularly here in Australia. Thanks, it's great to see a Brit come over here and do what you do, mate, and break through so many of the stigmas as well. So I appreciate it.
Do you know what, mate? If you need any help or if I can help out in any way with your events, let me know.
Will do.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, Ant.
As you've heard, Heston's book, Forging the Will to Fight, is available now via his website. You can also check out Heston's podcast, The ABCs of Heston Russell. I'll put it in the show notes. And don't forget, if you need help or support, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue at beyondblue.org.au. ADF personnel can also access confidential support. I'll link the details in the show notes. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Head Game. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. I'm at Middleton. Catch you in the next episode.